All right. Welcome back to the Progressive Rehab and Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Marie Alter, head clinical coach here at Progressive Rehab and Strength, with Dr. Alyssa Havison, another clinical coach here at Progressive Rehab and Strength. And we are continuing our conversation on powerlifting competitions. In our last episode, we really talked about putting together your meet plan and how to take attempts on meet day for really the first time or novice or non-competitive lifter. And in this episode, we're following up those concepts and ideas, but really moving into talking about strategy and handling for the competitive powerlifter. Competitive powerlifter does not mean advanced powerlifter because it takes a long time to become an advanced powerlifter. Someone can become competitive in their early years of powerlifting. So they can still be a beginner lifter and be quite competitive because they're strong and they have a desire to be competitive and get to the next level and keep climbing the competition ladder, so to speak. So, but at some point, those lifters will become intermediate and advanced lifters. And at some point, the more competitions you've done, you are an advanced competitor, meaning you've had experience on the platform, you know how to handle your nerves, you become very comfortable with what jumps you take on from attempt to attempt on each lift. You have your competition routine. So there's a level of advancement in terms of your strength abilities and how easy it is for you to keep getting stronger or how hard it is. But then you could become an advanced competitor in that you've just had a lot of competitions under your belt. And you know the ropes. So in any event, Alyssa is still our master of competition. um,
Master of competition.
Master of MC. There you go. Our MC here at PRS. So let's talk a little bit about what sort of things, as a lifter who's handling themselves in a competition, or as a coach who's handling a lifter who has a very specific goal for competing, um, both at that competition to get them to another competition and like the long game competition. So we need a qualifier for the last competition kind of thing. So let's talk about strategizing for the competition.
Yeah. And, when we're talking about a competitive power lifter who's really, competing against the top lifters in their weight class or division, even if you don't have a coach that can be there at a meet, I highly recommend having some form of a handler to help lead the way through the competition because there are a lot of details to pay attention to when you're not just thinking about, okay, what's my next attempt? I'm competing against myself. That's one aspect of this is the attempt selection still exists when it comes to is a more competitive power lifter, but we now have to consider the other competitors and how we're going to stack up, which is a lot to think about personally and as a coach. I always recommend not thinking about those things when you're lifting because you
Right.
should have a handler or a coach paying attention to that, putting in the next attempt, and you need to be focusing on yourself because at the end of the day, if you walk up to the bar, have successful lifts, you're going to have a better outcome than if you're distracted or worrying about everybody else.
So
Um,
let's talk a little bit about what that worrying about everybody else thing is, because it is a game, it is a sport. So when we're looking at it from a competitive standpoint, what are those things that we're looking out for as the handler or the coach that we don't want the lifter to be worrying about in order to win or place as high as possible or achieve a certain total or whatnot?
one of the big things is what everybody else is lifting. So and especially earlier on in the meet, right? Because when we're on squat, we need to get some kilos on the board and build that total. And we don't want to be chasing what everybody else is doing because we're still going to put the whole meet together. So as a coach or a handler, or a competitor if you can handle thinking about this stuff ahead of time. Personally, I I wouldn't want to, as a competitor, be worrying about everybody else, but as a coach, I really prepare in terms of knowing who we're competing against, what their past meet history looks like, how good they are at putting a successful meet together. Are they missing a lot of attempts? What's their potential on certain lifts? You can look at someone's total and it might be close to your lifters and see, well, they've got a big deadlift. At the end of the day, we have to be prepared for the fact that they might be able to pull whatever they need to
Right.
pull to place. And so throughout the meet, it's not always the time to be focused on those things, because you need to be focused on what you're doing and getting your lifts and building that total so that by the time we get to deadlift, there's a chance.
Mhm.
Um, and I think it's a lot for a lifter to be worried about everybody else, to be watching the board, to be doing the math. And so usually as a coach, I say, just lift. You're just going to do what we would do at a local meet, which is focus on having a successful next attempt. Keep your just stay focused on lifting. And if you have a coach that you trust, you'll know that they're going to put things on the bar that you can lift, and they're going to be able to do the math, figure out where we need to be in order to be successful um, in a more competitive situation.
So talk a little bit about where we're looking at for the new coach or the new handler, what or the new athlete who's becoming competitive. How do we start the strategy for reviewing the roster in advance and looking at what people are capable of so that we know how to strategize for that?
Yeah. So, and for a lot of this conversation coming from me, at least, is specific to a USA powerlifting. There are other federations, and they do put the rosters out, and they have a lifting database, so you can see that history. And there is open powerlifting
Hmm.
that actually pulls in people's numbers from all different
Different
federations. So
federations.
if you look at the roster, if you have a lifter who's competing in prime time at nationals, you look at the roster and you see who's there. Um, you usually have a small handful of people that you need to look at.
Hmm.
That's not the only handful of people you need to look at, and I'll get to that in a second. um, but you'll see who is in that session that your lifter is competing against. And then you can go to the database. USA Powerlifting has a database of past competitions. Now, in order to qualify for nationals, a lifter does need to have, achieved a qualifying total at a USA Powerlifting meet. But it could have been their first meet in USA Powerlifting. And therefore, there's not going to be other data on them in the USA Powerlifting database. And that's where I reference open powerlifting, where you can see their history across federations, see what they've done. Did they lift equipped in another federation? Did they lift equipped in USA Powerlifting? You can pull all of this stuff in. That's sometimes a good thing to know because, you know, um, equipped lifters just have a different background, or we not, because we can't compare that obviously to what they're lifting raw, but it might give you an idea of
Hmm.
kind of where their a lot of their strength gains and
Hmm.
capabilities have come
Hmm.
from. When I was saying that you don't only want to look at the lifters in that session, it's because when they decide who's going to lift in prime time, it has to do with the qualifying total that they have submitted for that competition. There are still other lifters in your lifters division and weight class that are lifting in the sessions earlier in the day. If we're talking about nationals, prime time is at the end of the day. All the other lifters have already lifted. It is very possible for somebody to lift in the regular session and actually still place top three at the end of the day in the weight class if they have such an enormous total that even the people who are selected in prime time aren't totaling more than that.
Hmm.
So you might not know that until the session during the day is over, but I wouldn't not look at that. That's definitely
Hmm.
something going into prime time where we're seeing probably the top 5, 6 lifters in that weight class competing. I would still just
I
double
mean,
check
that's
that.
definitely happened. I can't recall when it happened, but I have this like strong sense that in the past at nationals, like I've heard a coach say to their lifter, you got whatever when we were in the primetime session, but then not really because someone in the regular session during the day had out totaled that person or had like the same total but a lighter body weight or something like that. Um so we can't forget that and this is specific to nationals
Yeah.
or a competition where there is a prime time because I feel like there's been some one of your lifters they were in a competition that was testing out like a prime time.
Yeah.
But I don't know, is there prime
Usually
time?
that's not the case.
Mhm.
Sometimes it is. It's rare that you see like a prime time at a
Yeah.
local meet.
Yeah.
But that is something, it's just something to consider. It's a rare occurrence, but where I think someone could go wrong is by just not looking at it, because it's possible that your lifter could have placed above, the total that they need to get, but if you don't know it's there and you never
Right.
looked at it, you won't
Right.
know. And that's why they don't do awards like for the open division, or for a division where anybody is in prime time, they're not going to do awards for the sessions until after prime time and everybody's competed. So I'm going to use Jackie as an
Mhm.
example. She was competing in prime time as an open lifter, but she was also registered as an M1.
Mhm.
So at nationals, they couldn't do the M1 100
Right.
kilo awards until after prime time because
Right.
she still needed to lift.
Right.
So that is a, a piece of what you want to look at. And so even when you're preparing as a coach, I I would look at some of the top people in the that aren't in prime time to
Mhm.
see,
Mhm.
because one of the things that you might find is what they put in for their qualifying total was something that they did. They just did a qualifier to get it in. Maybe they moved down a weight class and did a qualifier and didn't push it.
Mhm.
And you can, and
And
that's the qualifying
their
total that's going to
qualifying
be
total isn't really representative of what they're gonna do on meet day.
correct. And that's the qualifying total they're going to put in because that's the qualifying total in the weight class. But what if they came down a weight class and they were lifting, 50 kilos more
Mhm.
at, yeah, sure, there's a change in weight class, but you may not really get a good idea of what they're capable of just by looking at the qualifying total. So do your homework. And again, I think it's a lot for a lifter to think about.
Right.
And I think some lifters will look and have an idea, but I also have lifters who are like, I don't want to know. It's your problem. You've got to deal with that part, and I'm going to show up and lift. And I think that for the people that are like that, it leads to a better outcome when they have a coach that they know that they can trust and that's going to worry about all the extra stuff that is just going to cloud your head and mess with your focus if you're thinking about what everybody else is doing. Um,
So, let's talk a little bit about, um, what is all that other stuff?
what everybody else is doing.
Well, no, so,
um,
like
so, well, like, are you, maybe you're talking about like dots and
No, I'm talking more about like how someone's performing in the competition. Like what are we watching for during the competition? Um like the coach should be looking at the other lifters performing on the platform,
mhm.
watching are they getting any red lights? What are they getting red lights for? How hard were their attempts? How much are they putting in for their next attempt? Because all those pieces of information are things that the coach should be calculating in their brain to help them figure out, okay, well, that person got a red light for depth by one of the judges and they still went up 5 kilos. So maybe they're that, like, let's see what happens on the next one. They get red lighted again and they go by one judge and they go up another 5 kilos. And we can assume that they're either going to get one or two, like they're not going to perform that great on
Yeah.
that third one. So we might make our judgment call for our third attempt if our lifter isn't feeling great or whatever based on how everybody else is doing.
Yeah, and that is something that we wanna look at, and I always, and we're talking about squat, and even as a coach on squat, I follow what's going on, I look at what's going on, but I, as a coach, try to remind myself, we're building a total on squat. Like we're not, it's not, I always think of it as once we get to deadlift, that's
Right.
really when the competition starts. Because what we don't want to do is risk at these meets where every kilo matters, we don't want to risk leaving anything on the platform. And that's where, we have to look at the risk versus reward. There might not be room to miss a lift in this meet. So
Mhm.
watching what other lifters are doing, seeing how hard it is, seeing if they're getting red lights might help to say, okay, maybe we can be like a little bit conservative on this third
Mhm.
squat and really make sure that we get it without pushing it, because we'll also save some energy for bench and deadlift,
Right.
and just putting the meat together that way. As a lifter, I think it's really distracting to look at, well, how do they look? Oh, that looked hard for them. Because then it's like now
Then
you're
it just
thinking about
messes with
other
your
people
head too.
struggling, and
I know, and
it's
you're like, "Well,
just
I'm lifting the same weight, or I'm lifting
yeah.
2.5 kilos
Oh, that
more than
looked
that
heavy.
person." You're like, "Oh, crap." If they can't do it, I can't do it kinda
The
thing,
judges are giving them red lights for this. What if
Yeah.
it's all these other things, and
Yeah.
I very much promote focusing on what you're doing. It's the same bar, the same plates, the same rack, the same thing you're used to. Forget all the rest of it. Just do the lift. Um, and
Yeah,
if you
and
have a good coach in your corner, then that's all you need to do.
yeah, and even, let's say you get a red light and the ref throws up a card, like, as the lifter, you shouldn't be worrying about finding out why you got a red light. Your coach or your handler is supposed to figure out what it was that you got the red light for, whether they asked the ref, they asked the scoring table. They have to figure it out and communicate with you what you need to do on your next attempt to get all of your lights, or at least two white lights. I don't like it when we just shoot for two white lights. I would prefer that we get all whites, because that's a you're technically executing well if you get all your white lights. Um, but
And
that
well, and it's subjective. That's why you have three
right,
referees.
exactly.
And at the end of the day, arguing with them is not really the answer, because it doesn't really matter what you think.
Oh my god, that's how you
They're
and
the
I
ones.
met.
Yeah. Um, and the other thing I was gonna say
Oh
is,
wait, just a sidebar. That's
yeah,
how Alyssa and I met because I was at bench nationals, and I got I don't know, I don't remember if they told me to like re-rack the bar, or they like gave me a red light for my wrist wraps
you didn't get
touching.
a red light for that. You
What
should have
was
gotten a
it?
red light for that.
What
It
was
was
it?
your wrist wraps were an issue,
But why? No.
but you wouldn't have gotten a red light for that.
So
That
what
should have
did
been.
they like told me to re-rack it or something? I can't remember.
I don't remember if you were told to replace it. I just remember you asking me, and I was saying they're
I
like
was
they
like,
were
"Well, this
too.
is the like carpal." You're like, "I know, I know." And I was like, "That's not technically the wrist." You're like, "I know, I know." And I was like, "How do you know?" And you're like, "Well, I'm in PT school." And I was like, "Oh, do you want a job?" And then you're here now, many, many
I was
years
like, just
later.
change how your wrist wraps are. This isn't the
I don't
time for this.
ugh. Anyway.
um, but as a so it it's wise to
Oh,
read
and
the.
I don't think I had a handler at that meet, so I was worrying about that for myself.
I don't remember. It was a while ago.
I
This was
don't
like
think I had a handler.
2018,
2017.
2017.
Yeah, I was handling myself. But that was a good example of me just showing up and doing a qualifier, like just qualifying. Like I didn't come out with my best number for that day. Like I just went, did the qualifying number I needed to go to Worlds. And so I didn't really need a handler, I guess. But um because also when you think about it, I looked at this is just kind of like summing up a little bit about what we did, like why I didn't need a handler on that day was I looked at the competition in advance, I looked at the roster, I looked who was registered, and no one was even close to I'm not trying to like gloat or anything, but like no one was close to my numbers even on their best day. Like their whole meet histories showed that I was like very far ahead of them. I really just had to go in and hit anything above a certain number in order to get my spot on the world team for bench worlds. And I've been at that point, I had been competing for like 8 years or something like that. And I was just like, this, and it was a one lift meet. I was like, I don't need someone to come with me for this,
Yeah.
But if it was a tight competition and it was like came down to 2.5 kilos, then I would probably want a coach with me that day. So anyway, that was a sidebar. Keep going.
Um, what I wanted to touch on, because we were talking about red lights, there are color cards for the infractions in competition. And if you're a coach, really, if you were a lifter, these are good things to know. It's a good thing to know if you see a light with a blue card under it for a certain lift, what that could be, because you probably can figure out what it was. Now, if you can't see it, that's, if you just don't see what happened, that's another thing. At nationals, you're always going to just go to the jury to ask what it was. And I would say that as a coach, sometimes I use my discretion. So if I have a lifter who gets one red light from one referee for something that I'm not too worried about, I will use my discretion as to whether or not I need to say something to my lifter about it, because that could be detrimental depending on the person, because now you've put in their head that something was wrong and now I got to focus on this thing when really you just want them to focus on like doing everything that they're used to doing, getting the lift. And it could have just been like an odd call, listen, if it's a depth call on squat, I might just be like, just make sure you're getting low. That's it. Like, but sometimes there definitely have been things that I'm like, I'm just not gonna, because some people can spiral.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And it's like, what did I do wrong? I'm so worried. And then it's just, we just go downhill from there. So, and yeah, and as a lifter, I would say you should have a coach that you can trust will bring to your attention what needs to be brought to your attention. And if they don't bring something to your attention, it's because they don't want you thinking about it. And
Just keep your blinders on.
yeah, just to like think about the next lift.
Okay, so you mentioned the meat doesn't really start or get interesting until the deadlift. Till the deadlift is. No. So tell us a little bit about why you say that. What happens with deadlift? What's unique about the deadlift? In terms of attempt selection. And then we can kind of dive into lot number, body weight, dots, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the reasons I say that is because we have no idea what's going to happen on squat and bench. I mean, somebody could have a horrible day and
Right.
get their openers, and then, so
Yeah, and that's like could be. I mean, with a highly competitive athletes, that could be like 20 kilos.
yeah.
If
And
someone just gets their opener and they were expecting to get like 10 to 20 kilos more on their third attempt squat.
yeah, and you'll be in a better position going into deadlift if you haven't missed any lifts before
Mhm.
that. So, with deadlift, it's like, okay, well, at this point, we're watching what everybody's deadlifting because we're getting close to what our total is going to be at the end of the meet. And that is when you really see, like, in these tight competitions where you see more of the competitive nature of these meets.
Mhm.
Uh, and with deadlift, so deadlift is unique because you can change your third attempt deadlift twice. Um, you cannot change your other lifts in competition. You can change your openers. And we may have touched on this
I can't remember.
in an earlier episode, but just to throw it in there, you can change your openers once, and it needs to be, if you are in flight A, it has to happen prior to it being 3 minutes before the start of the flight. If you're in a flight after flight A, it needs to be prior to the last 3 lifts of the flight before you. So there's a cutoff for changing your opener. You can only change your opener once. So if you put in your
Yes.
opener wrong at weigh-ins, don't run back and change it real quick, because what if you're warming up and you find you need to change it and you've already used that change?
But
So
then
you
don't
can,
forget to change it. Set an
yeah, but don't
alarm.
forget to change it. So you can change your openers once. You cannot change any other lift except for your third attempt deadlift. And there are rules around changing your third attempt deadlift, and people use the third attempt deadlift changes to kind of jockey for a position and be strategic at the end of the meet. Now, there are a couple things to know about these changes. Um, there are rules. You can't just change them all willy nilly. They can't be lighter than your previous attempt, which would not make any sense unless you missed an attempt. So you can't go lower than what that attempt was. Um, and you can't make it lower than the weight that's currently on the bar. So the timing of when you're changing it matters. Also, it can't change the lot number order of lifting. So lot numbers, and I feel like this would have been easier if I went over lot numbers first. Lot numbers are there for a couple reasons. One, they're going to determine the order of weigh-ins, and they are going to determine the order of lifting when two lifters have the same weight on the bar. Because you know, if you're lifting 150 kilos and somebody else is, who goes first? The lower lot number. So if you're competing against somebody and it's third deadlift and they've just deadlifted whatever 180, 200, whatever it is, and your lot number is after theirs, you can't put the same weight on the bar that they just finished deadlifting because I'm sorry, if your lot number is before theirs, hold on, I'm getting confused with, yes, before theirs, you can't put the same weight on the bar because that would change the order because you
Mhm.
technically should have lifted that
Right.
weight before them.
Right.
Um, so you would have to go up to, you'd have to be 2.5 kilos above what they just lifted. So the timing matters because if you want to change a weight and the bar is already loaded with X weight, you definitely can't go lower than what's already loaded on the
Mhm.
bar. Your bar can't be called loaded when you change it. But this is how people will be strategic, especially when they're waiting to see if somebody gets a third attempt deadlift. They might have something on there that, well, if they get this lift, I have to pull this. But if they don't get this lift, I have to pull this number so they
Right.
can then lower it from there. And then the lower number is going to be less risky. So
Lower
that's,
it, but to clarify, lower it, but still be heavier than what the other person lifted.
yes, correct.
And this
But,
is, I
and I
mean,
know this is
it's a little,
almost, it's
it's a little
confusing
confusing, but
unless you're used to doing it.
right.
You
But
can't
this
make it
is
lower than the weight that's on the bar already
right.
for another lifter.
Right. But this is also like if you have like a reach number and you're not quite sure if you're going to get it, but you know that 2.5 kilos lower is safe and you will get it. But if that person lifts a certain number that forces you to have to try the harder lift that you might miss and they win, versus if they pull that number and they miss it, then you can do your shoe in number and win. So this is like where the strategy comes in. And this is why it sounds confusing because it can be very confusing. And this is why it should be a coach or someone who has fully set down to understand this stuff handling you when it really matters. Um, for instance, at nationals or at the world championships or in
Pro meets.
a pro meet or whatnot. You shouldn't have to be thinking about this on meet day if you're the like advanced lifter who is like these meets are cost you money to get there, cost you money to train to get there, cost you money for a hotel. Like they're expensive. There's a lot on the line. You know, you don't want to just show up and not do well, or you don't want to show up and get confused and be nervous because of all this other stuff that you're trying to deal with. So, if you're going to invest in the competition and you're going to invest in the training and coaching leading up to the competition, invest in the coach too.
It really is a two-person job. You got the
Yeah.
lifter and the coach. There's too much room for error, both on the lifting side and the
Mhm.
coaching side for one person to be doing both of it. And yeah, like you said, you really should have a coach who, it's not their first meet that they're
Yeah, and
handling
I mean,
at.
even at nationals, I mean, I would say that even if you have one coach handling you, it always ends up being a team effort with like your significant other or another person on your team helping the coach out, even because there's just so much going on that, like, I know um I've always had, like, even if I have like one designated handler, you know, and who wasn't my husband, like, I've had the same coach handling me at like all these major competitions except for like world championships or whatever. Um and my husband would be like the person doing my knee sleeves, doing my, well, not doing my knee sleeves. If you can't do your own knee sleeves, that's a problem. One time they had to rip them off me. Not gonna lie, I had scratch marks, but I think that's just because I had like taken in so much sodium that day. But like, it, John would handle my like equipment. He would tell my handler how my warm-ups were looking because John would see me more in training, and my coach who was remote would just know what my numbers were, and so it was always like a team effort, and the my coach would also know the strategy, and John would be there to like support me mentally, emotionally, and my coach would be like handling everything else. So I do think that it can be even a group effort, a team effort. Um, I've I mean, the Garys, it's so I feel like they always there's like two of them with every lifter. There's always I feel like with everybody I always see two people plus the lifter. And it's not like you're paying two people. One of them is probably your significant other.
Yeah, and just to like throw this in there for prime time lifters at this point in time, you can have two
Right.
handlers in the back.
Yeah.
For regular sessions, you can't. Um, because there'd be too
They're
many
just too
people back
busy.
there. I mean,
Yeah.
as a coach, honestly, it's always just me when I'm
Yeah.
handling. Except I will
That's because
say
you're
this
just amazing.
this past nationals, I did have Alex send me a video from the audience because the person who I was watching I was putting in an attempt when I also
Mhm.
wanted to watch a deadlift. So
Right.
I said, "What did that look like? Send me a video." So it is helpful to, timing wise, as one person, you can do it. You just need to be ready to know you're going to throw an attempt in and go and run and watch something.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but being prepared for that is definitely helpful. There are a lot of things to account for. At nationals, oftentimes in prime time, people are competing for a pro card. The open pro cards are so the requirements at nationals is for women, it's a 475 dots and placing in the top three. And and for men, it's a 500 dots and placing in the top three at nationals. So you have two things there to think about. One is kind of easy in my mind because once you finish squat and bench and you have a dots calculator, and dots is a score that takes into account body weight and weight lifted, and they have apps and calculators for these. Once a squat and bench is done, you know what your lifter has to deadlift in order to get the dots that they need. So if you just have that number in your head or somewhere, and then you can focus on making sure that they at least hit that and watching the competition. And this is different than what we've talked about with the novice lifters when we're really just talking about focus on we want to have successful lifts, go 9 for 9. When we're looking at this level of competition, sometimes it's worth the risk to go for a third attempt deadlift that's going to pull you into a placing, because otherwise you might not be like reaching your goals for that meet.
Mhm.
So that's why sometimes you'll see people put something on the bar that might be a little bit out of reach, but it's like, well,
It's either we
it's
do
either
or we
this
don't.
or, um, and
So, I
then,
mean, with our novice lifters, we like to go 9 for 9. With female novice lifters, it might be 8 for 9. We'd be okay with that because of the unfortunate jumps that we can take on bench press, especially for females and much smaller females or novice females. That 2.5 kilo jump can be hard. Um, but then when it comes to the highly competitive lifter in a very competitive competition, um, it might like a eight, a 8 or 7 or 8 out of 9. I mean, really, we shouldn't be leaving anything on the platform for squat. Like, I really, we shouldn't be missing our squat at all. It should be like a weird thing that we miss a squat, which is has happened to me many times. um, and then bench, really, again, for the females, it's like a 2.5 kilo thing, but um, really, we should really shoot for 3 for 3 on bench as well. And then it's in the deadlift that we might miss that third one.
Yeah, and it's not because we don't wanna go 9 for obviously, you wanna go 9 for 9. The question is that third deadlift the thing that is gonna are we gonna play it safe just to get our third deadlift and we're basically giving up a placing
Right.
with that
Exactly.
decision or not? And this is one of the reasons why in my opinion, I think it can be challenging for these higher level competitive lifters to and I say higher and maybe what I should be saying is an advanced lifter who's competitive to hit PRs every meet because now you're at a point where the PRs aren't coming as easily
Mm-hmm.
and they're more risky.
Mm-hmm.
And as a coach, I think I always I don't want to say struggle the most, but I always have the biggest struggle with squat PRs at these highly competitive meets because we want the lifter to hit a PR, but
Right.
is it worth the risk? And I do think that oftentimes somebody who is, lifting closer to their potential, they kind of end up in this cycle of not always even going for PRs, not because it's not necessarily there, but it could just be too risky. And missing that lift might mean giving up a pro card at the end of
Right.
the meet.
Exactly.
And so we end up in this, and I think it can be challenging for lifters that end up in the cycle of okay, we go to nationals, we go to the pro meets, we go to, and it's all these high level meets where we're focusing on strategy to place or at that meet, and there might not be going for a PR might not be worth it based on the goals for that meet. And I think it's healthy to once in a
Mhm.
while throw in a low stress local level meet, just go hit some numbers, maybe hit some, PRs and have fun. I mean, not that these high level meets aren't fun, but they are stress.
They are stressful,
um,
but they're
you
fun.
know,
I always say, like, no matter how stressful they are, I always felt like it's like going to camp. It's like you get to see all your like all your powerlifting friends, all your just people you only see at competitions, and it's a lot of fun. And you get away from your regular life, and you go and do the thing that you're like always training for, and um, they're fun.
yeah, and so I think sometimes it's healthy to break that up, especially if somebody's in that cycle of competing to place and not necessarily even going for PRs at those meets because they're riskier. One other thing I want to throw in here while we're talking about this is the pro series that USA Powerlifting has because when we're talking about scoring and what coaches are focusing on at a meet, at most meets, it's going to be total. At nationals, we're thinking about dots when we're thinking about the pro cards and earning one, but we're not competing based on dots, generally speaking. But at the pro meets, we are. At the pro meets, they're really you're not competing across weight classes. Now, you could weigh in a weight class and break records in that weight class, but you're not competing by weight class. It's dots. So as a which is a lot more work in terms of following scoring as a coach because now you've got to know what this other person weighs and be doing the math all along. And to complicate it more, if it's a master's pro meet, there are age coefficients for the dot scores. So you're not just looking at the flat dots, you're looking at the dots with the age coefficient, which is going to be different depending on what age somebody is. And there's a lot of I have like a spreadsheet to like pop things in so that I don't have to do math by hand throughout the meet. But there are a lot of things to think about, and making sure that you have a handler um, that is prepared for those things is really important. So even if you have a coach that can't go, and a coach who's well equipped to navigate the scoring and following along with the meet, um, I would highly recommend making sure that you connect with a handler who is experienced with coaching at these meets prior to arriving there, and make sure that you have some like coverage if your coach can't be there so that somebody can take you through the day, and somebody that you trust and trust to get the math right, and trust to ultimately help you get to the best outcome for that meet.
Yeah. So competition is fun. Don't get stressed out about it, even though we talked about all these things.
I think it's
That's what
very stressful.
it is very stressful. But it shouldn't it should be for the lifter, it should be stressful because they want to do the best that they can on the platform to represent the training that they've been doing, you know? Um and that's why it's important to have someone, whether it's a coach, a friend, a training partner, a significant other, whatever, to help you on game day so that you can have your normal stress for lifting versus all that added stress for competing. And there will be competitive stress, which is totally normal. Like if you're not worried at all about performing well, then that's a little bit worrisome, because that will help you perform well to a degree. Obviously, if it's like beyond what's helpful, then we have to take a step back and figure out what's going on. But just to kind of recap what we talked about, um, from a competitive powerlifting standpoint, at these higher level meets or meets that you're using to qualify, if you are a novice competitor and you want to get to a higher level, you should know who the competition is in advance by looking at the meet roster, looking at their lifting data, um, and seeing how do they perform. Do they have a history of missing lifts? Do they have a history of not setting PRs? Like, are they lifting the same numbers in like all these competitions? What weight classes have they competed in prior? You want to look at what other people are opening with. You want to look at how the coach wants to look at how people are performing in the competition. The coach should be focusing on if you get red lighted or whatever is going on, figure out what's going on. The lifter should not have to worry about that. The coach should be putting in the attempts, but also discussing with the lifter how things felt, before making a decision. Or some lifters don't want to be a part of that. Some lifters just say, just put whatever you want in. I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like with handlers, I think it's important to communicate and understand what the lifter is going to need.
Yeah.
Most of the people that I am handling are people that I coach that I am used to. If there's somebody new that I'm handling, I'm gonna have that conversation ahead of time. Like, do you want me to talk to you? With all my lifters, I I don't even think about it anymore. I just go to the scoring table. If somebody
Yeah.
I don't think anybody wants to talk to me about it. I just automatically
So I
and
think a lot of my lifters, like, I think it's usually like for the after the first attempt, it's usually like a thumbs up or thumbs down. Or if something goes like really wrong, they might want to talk to me about it. But if everything looks good, I just do it. Just put it in.
Yeah.
But generally, like if the second attempt was a little bit harder than we anticipated, um, especially on deadlift, and we're trying to like strategize, I might have a little bit of a conversation between second and third, but not really between first and second. Oftentimes, like even if something looks funky or like even looks really good in the warm up room, I won't even tell them if I change their opener. Um, so what else?
Well,
Just to
then there's
recap.
the people that look horrible in the warm-up room, and then on the platform,
Oh
they're fine.
yeah.
I have a lifter
Yeah.
whose squats always I'm like, "Oof," like, as we're warming up, and then they get on the platform, and I'm
And
like,
it's like a
"Oh,
different
okay."
lifter.
But I'm always nervous in
I
warm-ups.
know. I
I'm
know.
always like, "It's
So,
gonna be okay."
yeah, so just I think the important part is just, have support on meet day and make sure your support knows how to support you. And that's something you should talk to them about before the meet happens, especially if you're a coach handling someone who you don't know and they've hired you to handle them. Get videos of lifts from them in advance, review them, review their meet history. If there's weird things in their meet history, talk to them about it. Say like, why are we always missing our deadlift? Like, what's happening? Why are we always missing bench? What's happening? That kind of stuff. Um, oh, there was some. Oh, what I wanted to mention is Alyssa and I have been working on a free download for you guys if it's your first competition, if it's your first time handling someone, or if you are a coach who just wants to provide your lifters with some literature or like a checklist on what to bring on meet day and how to support themselves or their lifters on meet day. Let's say you're a coach and you can't be with your lifter on meet day, this guide can be a really good guide to give to the person who will be handling your lifter. So at the time that we're recording this episode, I have no idea what this guide is called because I have not finished it, but it's almost done. Um, but anyway, it's basically a guide. It's like directions on how to handle someone on meet day or handle yourself on meet day. And there is a checklist for everything that you need to do and know and bring in your meat bag. Literally, you can like fill it out, check it off, blah, 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 so that everything goes smoothly on meet day, no matter what federation you're in. So you can go to the show notes to click the link to download that guide, and it comes with the checklist. So the checklist you can just print out and fill out before your competition so that you do not forget one important thing. And the guide has all the meat and potatoes on what to do, when, why, and how. So, with that all said, thank you so much for joining us. You can head over to Facebook and join us in the Secret Society of Barbell Mastery. We do form checks, we answer questions, we do Q&A. So just go in there and start a discussion thread on this episode if you have questions, and we will chat with you, and all that good stuff. Anything else, Alyssa? You could follow us on Instagram. I'm at Rory Megan _PRS. Rory with an I, Megan without an H. And Alyssa is at Alyssa Hope, Alyssa with a Y, not an I.
And 2 S's and
Two S's. Well, no, a lot of people spell it.
ALYSSA.
Yep. Alyssa Hope _PRS. We'd love to chat with you on Instagram, in our Facebook group, and all that. So that's it. Bye for now, and we will see you in the next episode.